Greetings, my dear viewer. This is a channel about marital infidelity and about the consequences if one spouse starts to cheat on the other. If you, as well as I do, support true family values and condemn cheating, then subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Let's get started. That was the final disagreement Arya and I would ever have, unfolding right after she received the divorce papers. Even as we crossed the threshold into the courtroom, we both clung tightly to our masks. I played the part of the husband desperate to save what was left, though the investigator's damning photograph of her locking lips with Barney King had already sealed our fate. By the time I had finished watching those first moments of the incriminating footage, the death knell of our marriage had sounded, and I was the one shoveling dirt onto its grave. As for Arya, her intentions remained as cryptic as ever. Perhaps she believed her affair could still be negotiated, that we might find some bizarre middle ground, a twisted arrangement where she'd remain married to me while keeping Barney on the side. Such a notion would be quintessential Arya Clarke, my wife of 27 years. Barney wasn't just any man either. He was one of her subordinates, and Arya had always been a maestro at orchestrating impossible situations with a chilling calm, both in her professional life and our personal one. Throughout our marriage, Arya's refrain had always been, "Grant, be reasonable." After the divorce papers arrived, however, she swapped that line for a new one. Fragile male ego. As in, "Grant, this isn't about me or Barney, it's about your fragile male ego." I despised those words, but before we could dig too deeply into that particular argument, she deflected with her trademark ease. "Grant, if you'd just get over your fragile male ego, you'd see this isn't a threat. It doesn't mean we have to end things." Her smile was practiced, disarming. "I don't love him. Give it a few months and he'll be a distant memory. You and I can still have our happy ending." I'll hand it to her. Arya's audacity was unmatched. She sat at the kitchen table, her fingers absently tracing the stem of her favorite wine glass, half filled with an Australian Chardonnay. Beside it rested a manila folder containing my divorce petition and the damning photos. The evidence was there, glaringly undeniable, but she continued as if oblivious to the gravity of the situation. The scene reminded me of the Titanic after it struck the iceberg. The orchestra might as well have been playing "Nearer, My God, to Thee," as Arya calmly proposed, steering the wreckage back to port. To her, this was still a negotiation. To me, it was over. I had no energy left for compromise or debate. "Let's pause here," I interrupted her, cutting through her well-rehearsed speech. "You keep throwing around this idea of my fragile male ego, as if it explains everything. What exactly do you mean by that?" She frowned, clearly irritated by the interruption. "It's straightforward, Grant. You're insecure. You're afraid of competition, scared you won't measure up." Her smile returned, soft and pitying. "But you don't have to worry. You're still my man, my guy." "And Barney?" I pressed. She waved the question away as though it were trivial. "Barney is just a distraction, like a treadmill or a set of weights. He's not replacing you. I'm not planning to stop loving you. There's no real threat." I gave her a look, a mixture of disbelief and faint disapproval, the kind husbands perfect over years of marriage to avoid escalating a fight. "Let me get this straight," I said slowly. "You think my issue is that I'm afraid you'll stop loving me? That you'll trade me in for someone better or younger?" She nodded, her smile widening. "Exactly. That's why you're so defensive. But you don't need to be. You're enough for me, Grant. And this vulnerability you keep talking about, you think it's because I'm a man?" She reached out and patted my arm in that infuriatingly patronizing way. "Oh, honey, it's not just you. All men have fragile egos. It's what we wives do. We bolster our husbands, keep their confidence intact." Her smile broadened as though she'd just shared some profound universal truth. I resisted the urge to roll my eyes. Arya had always been a fan of simplistic pop psychology that framed women as inherently stronger than men. Debating her wasn't worth the effort, but after 27 years, I was finally done letting this nonsense slide. Arya, you've been throwing that phrase around for years, I said, fixing her with a steady gaze. And every time, I've let it go. I've picked my battles. But if there's one thing I want you to understand, it's just how ridiculous this argument is. She opened her mouth to reply, but I held up a hand to stop her. The idea of the fragile male ego exists because it's unexpected. Think about it. How often do you see a man get hit where it hurts the most? It's a trope in every comedy skit. She hesitated, then nodded slightly. Plenty of times. And it's funny, isn't it? Because men are supposed to be tough, and seeing one brought low is ironic. The big, strong guy reduced to a ball on the floor, gasping for air. She smiled faintly, conceding the point. Now imagine the same thing happening to a woman. It's not funny, is it? She shook her head. No, that's violence. Exactly, because women are perceived as fragile. Seeing a woman in pain isn't entertaining, it's upsetting. And it's the same with this so-called ego. At work, my friends mock everything about me. My weight, my hairline, even my performance in bed. Imagine if your friends did that to you. Her face twisted in shock. Women don't do that to each other. Exactly. But for us, it's normal. We take it because we have to. The only place I've ever felt safe letting my guard down is here, at home, with you. What you call my fragile male ego is just me being human with the one person I thought I could trust. Her confident smile faltered, and she seemed ready to argue but stopped herself. That's the real issue, Arya, I continued. You were supposed to be my safe harbor, but you're not. Not anymore. I started noticing the cracks 6 months ago. The way you looked at me, the little jabs about my body, the growing distance between us. Even before Barney, you weren't my partner anymore. Her eyes glistened, threatening tears. Grant. I shook my head, cutting her off. I tried, Arya. I planned trips, complimented you, did everything I could to remind you how much you mattered to me. But it didn't make a difference. You'd already checked out. The silence that followed was heavy, almost suffocating. For the first time, I felt like my words had finally struck home. I started paying more attention to my appearance, dressing sharply and addressing the small details I had once overlooked. Regular trips to the gym became routine, fueled by the hope that you might remember the version of me you once loved. But as I glanced down at my hands, I realized it was futile. Whatever I was trying to salvage no longer held any meaning. I wouldn't allow myself to cry in front of you. Vulnerability felt like a luxury I could no longer afford. You began making excuses to cancel plans, avoiding trips we once anticipated. When I complimented your outfits, your face would stiffen, as though you were calculating whether I'd figured out who you were dressing for. And when I sent flowers to your office, there was only silence, no response, no acknowledgement. Then came the arguments. You seemed to pick fights deliberately, crafting them to sidestep intimacy. It became glaringly clear that I had failed to rekindle what we once had. The connection we shared had faded, and as much as it pained me to admit it, you were no longer special to me either. While I never stooped to instigating fights just to avoid you, I often found myself inwardly groaning, wondering how things had deteriorated to this point. Arya, I said quietly one evening, can't you just be honest? Not with me, if that's too much to ask, but at least with yourself. You looked up briefly, your eyes meeting mine before dropping again to your hands. Hands I once thought so elegant, now trembling ever so slightly. I shrugged. Yes, I'll admit my pride took a hit. I spent hours behind closed doors at work, mourning what we were losing. I tried to project strength, hiding behind the professional facade I'd perfected, so you wouldn't see how deeply you'd hurt me. I began finding reasons to leave the house, small excuses to avoid staying in the same space with someone who could wound me so effortlessly. Your expression registered surprise, but I simply smiled faintly and rested a hand on yours. You might be pleased to hear, I added, that my pride has healed. I've found other sources of validation, other people and things that remind me I have value. You searched my face for answers, as if trying to piece together what I was saying. No, I said, preempting the question forming on your lips. I never cheated on you, but I couldn't help noticing that some women at the gym didn't seem disgusted by me anymore. By the time I'd gathered enough clarity to speak with a lawyer, my fragile ego was nothing more than a distant memory. Are we finished here? I asked, believing I'd said everything that needed saying. I thought maybe, just maybe, you'd finally understood. But I had forgotten one crucial detail. I was married to an attorney. You never surrendered without a fight. Grant, this is unnecessary, you began, your voice rising with emotion. Yes, I've been distracted, but I never stopped loving you. In my heart, you've always been my number one. I'm sorry if I hurt you. I didn't realize how delicate you were. You kept talking, weaving an intricate web of apologies and explanations, as you've always done so well. But one word snagged my attention. Delicate. You still didn't understand. And at that moment, I knew you likely never would. My patience, already worn thin, finally snapped. Arya, stop, I interrupted, my voice sharp with frustration. After a measured breath, I continued. You're missing the point. This isn't about some fragile male ego. But Grant, you interjected, everyone's ego is fragile, especially men. I leaned forward, my tone edged with exasperation. Arya, listen to me. For the past 27 years, I've tried to be honest with you while sparing your feelings. Every time you asked if your lipstick worked or whether a dress suited you, I had to carefully balance truth with diplomacy. I couldn't let you walk out looking ridiculous, but I also couldn't risk wounding you. Your eyes widened, unaccustomed to such bluntness. When I said, maybe that lipstick doesn't go with your blouse, or suggested you change because I wasn't thrilled about the neighbor's stares, I was giving you an escape. I let you think my words stemmed from insecurity, that my so-called fragile ego was at fault. Do you know why? You shook your head, visibly perplexed. Because I wanted to protect you. Even when you dismissed my comments as trivial, I worked to shield you. Yes, I've made mistakes, like the time I said your eyeshadow was too bold or admitted that a dress didn't flatter you. And how did you react? With tears, cold thanks, and weeks of frosty silence. Anger flashed briefly in your eyes as you stared at me. So you've been lying to me for 27 years? Selective truth, I replied dryly. I told you you were the most beautiful woman in the world, that your efforts at the gym made you look ageless, that you outshone any goddess. I meant those words because I loved you. But now, let's be honest, Arya. You have stretch marks. Your body isn't the same. Your creams don't erase the wrinkles, and your hair is turning gray. You gasped, stunned by the rawness of my words. Remember how you're feeling right now, I said. That's what I've been enduring for months. Imagine if I told you I'd been with a younger woman, someone flawless, eager, and untouched by time. How would your ego survive then? Your face paled, your voice barely audible as you murmured, "Not well." Exactly. That's what you never grasped. I know you're not the most beautiful woman in the world, but to me, you were. I saw every imperfection and cherished them because they told our story. Your stretch marks, they nourished our children. Your hips, they carried them. Those wrinkles, they came from years of laughter we shared. I loved every flaw. Tears streamed down your face, but your chin remained raised, defiant. And now? You asked, your voice barely above a whisper. I hesitated. A part of me wanted to deliver the final blow, to leave you reeling and desperate for understanding. But that wasn't the purpose of this conversation anymore. Taking a deep breath, I allowed my words to settle between us, the weight of them hanging heavy in the silence. This was never truly about Arya. Staring into the mirror, She saw time slipping away and clung to the illusion that recapturing her youth lay in the arms of a younger man. When everything fell apart, she masked her vulnerability with biting remarks and a pretense of self-assurance. But now, the truth is evident to both of us. She is fragile, diminished, and destined to face solitude in the end. As for me, I shed my tears long before, safely hidden in the confines of my office, parked in my car, or sitting quietly in a secluded park not far from home. I spent months burying the pain caused by her betrayal, struggling with the crumbling remains of our marriage, and eventually mourning its death. Once the storm passed, I knew it was time to consider what came next. My first step was to confront a question. Who did I want to become? Could I stoop to exploiting her vulnerability, claiming some hollow victory over a woman who had already dismantled her own life? No, that was not the man I aspired to be. I resolved to choose compassion over cruelty, integrity over pettiness. I wanted to see in myself a man who valued honesty and dignity. Drawing a deep breath, I placed my hand gently over Arya's. What did I see now? A woman who had once been part of my most cherished memories. Someone who had held my trust, until that trust was irrevocably broken. I gave her hand a soft squeeze. In her, I saw someone I would genuinely miss. She stood, attempting a smile that wavered and faltered, failing to mask the tears welling in her eyes. "It doesn't have to end this way," she murmured. But it did. "We can't turn back," I said, exhaling slowly. "You're right about one thing. I'm not weak. But my trust? That was delicate. And now it's gone. I'll never be able to take off the armor I've had to put on." "I can't let you back in," I continued. "We might try again, live under the same roof, share a bed, take trips, build new memories. But I'd always feel like I had to look over my shoulder. I'd always wonder, is she judging me? Comparing me to someone else? Staying because she loves me? Or because it's the easier choice?" "That's not true," she said, her voice trembling. I shook my head. "I can't live like that, Arya. I still have years ahead of me, and I can't spend them in a relationship devoid of trust. Pretending I'm safe when I'm not. I don't deserve that. And if you truly loved me, you wouldn't want me to endure it either." Though she had built a career on crafting compelling arguments, Arya couldn't hide her thoughts from me. I watched her silently weigh her options, running through possible retorts, searching for one that could change my mind. And then, I saw the moment it hit her. There was nothing left to fight for. Her gaze dimmed, the fight extinguished. Once she stopped resisting, the divorce moved quickly. Jewelry was traded for tools, the television and furniture went to her, and I took my half-restored Mustang. The house was sold, the proceeds split evenly, and we avoided exorbitant legal fees. What's strange about divorce is how it lingers. Even after the paperwork is signed, it's not truly over. Arya and I still cross paths at our children's birthdays, during holidays, and at family milestones. Sometimes she arrives with a date. For the past year, I've been bringing someone too. It's been the same woman, and the glint in Arya's eyes tells me she knows exactly what that means. I try to temper my pride, but every so often, I indulge in a sliver of it. Maybe my ego hasn't fully healed just yet. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you. Greetings, my dear viewer. This is a channel about marital infidelity and about the consequences if one spouse starts to cheat on the other. If you, as well as I do, support true family values and condemn cheating, then subscribe to the channel and give this video a like. Let's get started. Soft golden light poured through the kitchen windows, casting a warm glow across the polished wood of the counters. The savory sizzle of bacon filled the air as Freddie deftly flipped each piece, his movements seamless and second nature. Humming a melody he had long associated with their peaceful mornings, he worked with the ease of someone whose actions had become a heartfelt ritual. This quiet tradition, was one of the countless ways he showed his love for Sabrina. But this morning wasn't like any other. It was their 21st wedding anniversary. Freddie treasured the simplicity of his daily habits, especially those that symbolized his devotion. Making Sabrina's breakfast had long been a cherished part of his routine, a small but meaningful act that reflected the strength of their bond. The rich, comforting aroma of coffee soon joined the medley of breakfast scents, and Freddie turned toward the doorway, eagerly awaiting Sabrina's bright smile. When she appeared, however, her expression lacked its usual warmth. She greeted him with a soft kiss on the cheek and murmured her thanks for breakfast, but there was a distance in her manner. Taking a seat with her coffee, she absently drummed her fingers on the side of the mug, her thoughts clearly elsewhere. Freddie tried not to dwell on it, attributing her aloofness to the work stress she often spoke about. With year-end deadlines fast approaching, he assumed her distracted demeanor was just a symptom of the mounting pressure. Yet, a small voice in the back of his mind urged him to pay attention. There was something different about her, something he couldn't quite put into words. Dismissing the nagging feeling, Freddie pressed on with their plans. He brought up the dinner reservation he had made at a trendy new Italian restaurant, hoping to spark some enthusiasm in Sabrina. Instead, she hesitated, placing her fork down with deliberate care before speaking. "I completely forgot to mention it," she said, her voice tinged with regret. "I have a work meeting tonight that I can't miss. It's really important." Her words carried an apologetic note, but there was also an undercurrent that Freddie couldn't define. His heart sank, though he quickly masked his disappointment with a practiced smile. "That's all right," he said gently. "We can celebrate this weekend instead." Sabrina seemed relieved by his understanding response and smiled back before excusing herself to get ready for the day. Left alone in the kitchen, Freddie couldn't shake the growing sense of unease. Memories of Sabrina's recent behavior began to surface. The late nights, the missed dinners, the hesitant tone she often used when discussing work. Freddie told himself not to overthink it, but an undeniable worry began to take root. As Sabrina prepared in their bedroom, Freddie cleared the dishes, his mind a whirlwind of doubts and questions. In front of the mirror, Sabrina carefully applied her makeup, her thoughts racing. She hadn't been entirely truthful. There was indeed a meeting, but not the kind she had implied. Her pulse quickened at the thought of Grant, the man who had stirred feelings she hadn't experienced in years. The excitement of their affair had become a tempting escape from the monotony of her life with Freddie. Though guilt tugged at her, Sabrina shoved it aside, convincing herself, once again, that this would be the final time. As she exchanged flirty texts with Grant, her anticipation drowned out any lingering remorse. She chose her outfit with care, selecting the sleek dress Grant had once complimented, and gave her reflection one last approving glance. By the time she re-entered the kitchen, Freddie had already tidied up. She kissed him goodbye, promising they'd make up for the missed evening soon, but her departure left an unmistakable void in the room. As the door clicked shut, Freddie stood motionless. The uneasy feeling he had tried to ignore earlier now loomed larger. Seeking comfort, he decided to visit Addison, his sister-in-law, who had become a trusted confidant since losing her husband. Tonight, more than ever, he needed someone to confide in. Driving through the quiet streets to Addison's house, Freddie's mind raced with memories of Sabrina's recent behavior. He reminded himself to trust her. Trust was the foundation of their 21 years together, but the creeping doubts refused to fade. Meanwhile, Sabrina had returned home, not to tackle errands as she'd claimed, but to prepare for her evening with Grant. In the privacy of their bedroom, she deliberated over her choice of attire, her emotions a mix of nervous excitement and gnawing guilt. What had started as harmless flirtation had evolved into a secret affair that consumed her thoughts. Grant's spontaneity and passion were everything she felt her life with Freddie lacked. When her phone buzzed with a text from him, she couldn't help but smile, though her happiness was tinged with conflict. At Addison's house, Freddie tried to immerse himself in her welcoming presence and the glass of wine she offered, but his thoughts kept returning to Sabrina. Finally, he voiced what had been weighing on his heart. "I don't know what's happening with Sabrina," he confessed, his voice heavy with emotion. "She feels distant, like she's slipping away from me." Addison listened carefully, her brow furrowed with concern. "Have you asked her about it?" she asked softly. Freddie shook his head. "I've tried, but she always says it's just work stress. It doesn't feel like the whole story." He paused, the pain of his uncertainty visible in his expression. "Part of me is afraid to find out what's really going on." Meanwhile, Sabrina and Grant's evening unfolded in a bubble of excitement and intensity. In his arms, she felt alive in ways she hadn't in years, the thrill of their connection overpowering her guilt, at least for the moment. Back at Addison's, Freddie wrestled with the realization that something fundamental had shifted in his marriage. The life they had spent 2 decades building felt fragile, slipping from his grasp no matter how tightly he tried to hold on. Sensing his turmoil, Addison suggested they go for a walk to help clear his mind. The crisp evening air offered a brief respite, but Freddie's heart remained heavy. Deep down, he feared he already knew the truth he wasn't ready to face. Freddie reluctantly agreed to go along, but each step he took outside felt heavier than the last. An inescapable sense of dread weighed on him, a creeping certainty that his life was falling apart in ways he couldn't fully grasp. His mind raced in endless loops, each thought sharpening into a painful, unrelenting question. "I just don't understand," Freddie murmured to Addison as they walked beneath the faint glow of the streetlights. "Where did it all go wrong? Was I not enough for her?" Addison's expression softened, and she gently placed a hand on his arm. "Freddie, you don't need all the answers right now," she said softly. "And this isn't your fault. People change, and sometimes it has nothing to do with what you did or didn't do. But you deserve the truth." Her words hit him like a blow to the chest. The truth. That was what he longed for. No, what he needed. But when it finally came to light, would he be strong enough to face it? Could he handle the secrets Sabrina was keeping? Across town, Sabrina sat at a dimly lit bar with Grant. Their laughter mingled with the hum of the crowd, their chemistry undeniable. She had told Freddie she had a work meeting, but guilt occasionally crept into her thoughts, no matter how hard she tried to bury it. Grant's charm, his undivided attention, it made her feel vibrant again, in a way Freddie hadn't for years. Each stolen moment with Grant felt like a reprieve from the stifling monotony of her marriage. For Sabrina, the affair had become more than an escape. It was a way to reclaim control, to feel wanted and appreciated again. But as the night wore on, a nagging unease began to surface. The hurt she'd seen in Freddie's eyes lately lingered in her mind, even in his silence. She knew her actions were wrong, yet her time with Grant felt so irresistibly right. Excusing herself, Sabrina slipped away to the restroom. Staring at her reflection in the mirror, she barely recognized the woman looking back. Her face betrayed her uncertainty. Was this really the path she wanted to follow? Was her dissatisfaction with the marriage as undeniable as she had convinced herself? Deep down, she wondered if she still loved Freddie. Back at Addison's house, Freddie excused himself and left. He couldn't shake his restless energy, unable to remain still. The quiet streets in the early hours after midnight became his escape, though his thoughts refused to settle. He knew Sabrina was likely home by now, but the thought of facing her filled him with a mix of dread and determination. He couldn't let this tension fester any longer. The truth was out there, and he needed to confront it. When Freddie arrived home, the stillness in the house felt suffocating. The faint hum of the refrigerator and the ticking of the clock were the only sounds. Moving through the rooms, he noticed the telltale signs of her presence: Sabrina's purse on the counter, her phone resting face up on the side table. His breath hitched as he reached for it, his hands trembling. What he might find terrified him, but he couldn't stop himself. And then he saw it. The messages from Grant, flirtatious emojis, intimate exchanges, it was all laid bare. The proof of her betrayal struck Freddie like a physical blow. He had feared this for months, but the confirmation extinguished any remaining hope that he had been wrong. His stomach churned as anger surged through him. Just then, Sabrina appeared in the doorway, oblivious to the storm she was walking into. When she saw him sitting there, her phone in his hand, her body froze. The air between them grew thick with tension, the silence stretching unbearably. Freddie finally broke it. "So this is what it's come to, Sabrina?" His voice was low but saturated with pain. "This is how you repay me after everything we've been through?" Sabrina's face drained of color. Her hands shook as she instinctively reached out. "Freddie, it's not what you think. Please." A bitter laugh escaped him, his disbelief plain. "Not what I think," he echoed, his voice rising. "You've been lying to me, sneaking around, and now you're telling me this isn't what it looks like?" Tears filled Sabrina's eyes as she moved closer, but Freddie wasn't done. He rose to his feet, his fists clenching as he fought to control his fury. "You've been distant for months, and I told myself it was stress. I tried to be patient, to understand. But the truth? You gave up on us. You chose him. Grant, the man you've replaced me with." Sabrina's knees buckled as she collapsed onto the couch, her face buried in her hands. "I'm sorry," she whispered, her voice barely audible. "I never meant for it to get this far. I was so lost." "Lost?" Freddie's voice was sharp, cutting through the room. "I was here the whole time. I never left. But you didn't even try to fix this. You just gave up." Sabrina looked up, her face streaked with tears. "I didn't want to hurt you. I swear I didn't. But I was so lonely, Freddie. You're not the same man I married. You were distant, too. I needed something. Someone." Freddie exhaled deeply, his chest heaving as he fought to rein in his emotions. When he finally spoke, his tone was measured but resolute. "You don't get to destroy us and then ask for forgiveness like it's that easy. I've had enough." Sabrina's voice cracked as she begged, "Please, Freddie, don't do this. Don't leave me. I'll do anything. I'm so sorry." But Freddie's decision was already made. He turned to the door, gripping the handle tightly. Pausing for a moment, he glanced back, his eyes filled with a mix of sorrow and finality. "You had a choice, Sabrina, and you made it." With that, he walked out, the door slamming shut behind him. Standing on the porch, Freddie drew in a deep breath, the cool night air filling his lungs. The confrontation had left him raw and hollow, but beneath the ache in his chest, there was something else, a faint but unmistakable sense of relief. His marriage was over, and so was the betrayal that had consumed it. For the first time in years, Freddie felt free. My friend, and this is the end of the story. If you liked this story, then put your royal like and subscribe to the channel. May the force be with you.